The West Bank settlements are a very complicated issue. Let's break it down. It was a 1948 war that left the Israelis and the Palestinians very segregated. The Palestinians drove out the Jews and had the West Bank. The Israelis had most of Israel, although there were still some Arabs there. It stayed this way until 1967. There was another war. Israel captured the West Bank and other lands. Wasn't quite sure what to do with the West Bank. But then some Israelis went back to Hebron, citing the history there and their religious and historical ties. The Israeli government reluctantly allowed them to stay, and from that small beginning, we now have hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the West Bank. The settlements complicate peace efforts. The entire peace process is predicated on this notion of land for peace. The Israelis are to give up the West Bank and some other lands, and in turn, they're supposed to get peace and security. The Palestinians would get a state. But the Palestinians say all these settlements make it impossible to create a viable Palestinian state in the West Bank. And they note that there's now some 600,000 Jewish Israelis in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. This is roughly 10% of Israel's population that now lives beyond its 1967 boundaries. East Jerusalem is part of the West Bank, but it's a place that holds a very special meaning for both the Israelis and the Palestinians. Israel captured East Jerusalem in the 1967 war, and this allowed them access to the holiest site in Judaism, the place of the two biblical temples. But the Palestinians have their own religious site, the Haram esh-Sharif, or noble sanctuary, that's built atop the ruins of these two old temples, and they want East Jerusalem as a capital for a future state. The settlers note that Jews have lived in the West Bank, which they call Judea and Samaria, for thousands of years, and they cite this historical and religious history for being there. They also cite that it's a modern-day security issue. They say if the Israeli military was not in the West Bank, Palestinians could fire rockets to almost any part of Israel. And it's important to note that every Israeli government since 1967 has allowed these settlements to expand. Some have done it reluctantly, some have done it very enthusiastically. The Palestinian counter-argument is that with all these settlements, and there's about 130 of them in the West Bank, the Israeli military is everywhere, and they say this is intentional. All these settlements give the military a reason to be in every part of the West Bank. The Palestinians say this makes everyday life very difficult, just traveling around to work, to shop, to go to a hospital. And they say beyond that, the larger goal of a state also becomes very difficult, if not impossible, with so many settlements throughout the West Bank. Israel has dismantled settlements. The most dramatic example was in 2005 when it removed all 8,000 or so of its settlers from the Gaza Strip. But this was a very difficult process for Israel, both for its government and for the population. The most realistic solution would probably be land swaps. In this scenario, Israel would get to keep some of the big settlement blocks that it has, and they would be incorporated into Israel. But then Israel would have to give up some of its existing territory to the Palestinians for a Palestinian state. This is something that's been talked about for at least 15, 16 years now, but we're nowhere near a solution. And it's important to remember that the settlements are just one of many issues that have to be decided here. Questions of drawing boundaries, determining the status of Jerusalem, the fate of Palestinian refugees, violence and terrorism. These are all issues that remain unresolved and part of this long-running Palestinian-Israeli conflict.